Hello. If anybody can't hear us, just shoot us a line in the chat. But I'm happy to welcome you all to our inaugural project with Relvas. Her show is titled House of Mirth. This space we called exponential growth, and it sort of came out of just us in quarantine and really wanting to um, we're just locked in here and spending a lot of time in the psych hall, and really happy to share the space with people and artists and work that really benefits from being in such an intimate environment. And really happy to have Lee be the first project. Spending a lot of time in here. I just kept having her work come into my mind, and definitely an artist that is definitely needs to kind of have the benefit of the communion with the work to be able to kind of dive into it. And I feel like this space really brings out a lot of things that happen mentally, but a lot of these physical experiences happen as well. So I'm really happy for you guys to be here. This is our first project, so we're kind of working things out, and really grateful to have Alexander Hayden, who's the tech master of all technology, and we wouldn't have been without him. And yeah, and also at the end, it's going to be about an hour. And at the end of this, there's going to be a Q&A session. So in the chat section, just if you have a question, type it up, and then we'll open it up at the end and there. So thank you very much for coming, and I would like to introduce Thomas and Savannah Knoop for their conversation on the show.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. Can you guys hear us okay? Great, great. Well, just to jump off what Sean said, we're really grateful to have you guys here with us today, and Happy New Year, and thank you for having us, Exponential Growth, Sean and Alex. And I've been to 2 Zoom dance parties, and I thought that this would be a fun and easy way, and it's more difficult than I thought. So thanks, you guys, and we're happy.
Yeah,
to have you guys with
happy to
us
see
in
all
a
your
strange
squares.
Zoom way. So we're just gonna launch in. So first round, we're going to talk about money. So Lee has been sort of experimenting with dollar bills for about 2 years now, and they've taken on different iterations. And I thought it'd be a good way to sort of get our foundation of a lot of the themes in this work through approaching money. And at one point you were making these money quilts with a jig, and Lee would cut up everything sort of except for the presidential head and rearrange them, and now they've been cannibalized in different ways. So let's, if you can just start there. Sure. So I started using the dollar bills as a material in sculpture because I was having a major sort of psychological problem where I felt like sort of stuck in this brain loop about money. And of course, whenever you're sort of confused or stuck about money, it affects like every aspect of everything that you want to think about, and it's kind of like how to be a good person in the world, like how to spend your hours, how to be a working artist if you're not independently wealthy, And then, of course, if you are at all have a utopian bent, which I know many of us do, you have this feeling where you're like, I can solve capitalism. And that feeling might last for, depending on your disposition, a year to however long. And I think there's sort of like a lot of aspects about sort of changes that I went through in the last like 20 years as a sort of working artist, which is like I started being an artist in Chicago in the DIY world, which is so beautiful, and you can live off of like maybe $5,000 a year and dumpster dive all your food. And that's what I did for a bunch of years. And that was like a great way to figure out how to make work, because you have so much freedom because you're financially free, to a degree. But then, of course, lots of different things happen. You suddenly end up in New York City, the most expensive place in the whole world, basically. And when you're in like a official art world, whatever that means, you're in a winner-take-all economy. And so New York is a winner-take-all economy. Being an artist feels like it's a winner-take-all economy, like everything. And it like really started to bother me, where I don't know if you guys have had this feeling when you wake up in the morning and you're like, all I can think about is like, how am I gonna get that like $30 in my bank account to like grow? Is what I can survive. And you feel like you can't think about the things you want as an artist because you're just constantly thinking about this.
Well, there's this thing about being broke. It's like George Orwell says in Down and Out, Paris and London, that it's just so boring being broke because
it's so boring, and the more I thought about it, the stupider I felt like I was getting about it. It was like not productive thinking. But there's a few things that really kind of made me want to use actual money. One is actually reading Edith Wharton's book, House of Mirth, which we don't really have time to talk about, if you guys want to talk about that later. But the other thing is in Dickens, in Great Expectations, part of the plot is that there's this young poor boy, and at a point he gets this anonymous sponsor who kind of makes him be a gentleman, or he's like on the road to becoming a gentleman. And the whole time he's getting this financial sponsorship, he thinks his money is coming from one source, and then he finds out at the sort of dramatic climax of the book, it's coming from a different source. And I was like, Dickens said it, like, it matters where your money comes from. It matters how you make your money, and it matters. And so Dickens was not like trying to solve capitalism the way I was trying to. He just like does this really beautiful way of kind of describing what it did, what it does, and how it changes your life and how it makes things different. So this is like a personal loop that only I would make. I went from Great Expectations to deciding to use dollar bills as a material. And the other thing that I really like to talk about is that often when you read artist interviews and stuff, you're just like, you think that the concepts sort of evolve, like come fully formed, like this was my great conceptual project about money. But actually, you're like, okay, I'm in the studio. How do I make art? And you're like, I'm a monkey, and I'm just like gonna hit something until I make something work, or
lick
like
all the walls.
I'm gonna lick it, or cut it up into little pieces and see what it works. Like that is kind of what being a sculptor, especially because you're dealing with objects all the time, kind of feels to me. So I was working with the money, and I was trying out different ways.
And Leah would say to me,
I would say, because I would always want to take Savannah out for dinner or whatever, and I would say, come on, money tree. Do I look like a guy who's worried about money? Like that was kind of the bravado that I enjoyed feeling. Cutting up dollar bills. And what I discovered, my sort of grand takeaways after about a year of trying to figure out what this material was and what it meant, was that I felt two things. And the two things that I felt were opposite, and they never canceled each other out. And the first feeling was that money is too real. Because,
But you didn't use fake
well, no, I couldn't use fake money, but that's like a whole other cul-de-sac.
Right.
But money is too real because like after I'd taken out $200 in ones from the bank, I was like, that's too much. Like I can't, this is the stupidest thing I could be doing. If I'm like a broke person trying to talk about how money works, this is a waste of money. This is like stupid. So that was one feeling. And then the other feeling I had was that money is totally fictional. You know, especially when you work with it as a material, you become very aware that it is this blend of cotton and linen, and they print on it, and there's all these sort of weird design choices that they made. But like, the point is that it is this fiction that we all have decided to believe in, and for some reason, I can, as long as I don't cut it up, I can bring this dollar bill to the bodega and I can get some Sour Patch Kids. And really, there's nothing about that that makes sense.
Well,
So,
especially with the gold standard, and I mean, it's like it's more arbitrary than ever. Not that
yes,
we're going to talk about that, but the kind of that architecture of fantasy around it just keeps getting more rich.
right, totally. Well, that's something that you sort of absorb from the world. Like, how is it the case that we're in this insane pandemic right now, but the stock market is still doing great? Like, how does that work? It seems like money gets more and more imaginary, you know, and that could be great because it's like, well, if it's imaginary already, like let's spread it around. Except that all the other apparatuses that give money value are still directing money to the same sources, and that's why the stock market is doing great, even though you know we all know.
So you have a sort of emotional and logistical threshold of $200.
Yes, exactly. That I couldn't get it. I couldn't get beyond it. As much as I wanted to be totally free and totally recognize how money was fictional, I couldn't make it all real and I couldn't make it all fictional. Like those two were just kind of constantly in loggerheads with each other, which is kind of interesting because it's like keeps this idea of like negative capability, keeping two ideas in your head at the same time.
Right.
But then, so the third thing that I really felt about this money material happened in my life circumstances, which was that I finally sort of started to understand how I wanted to use this material as a sculptor. And then COVID hit and I lost my job and and eventually I started getting unemployment for the first time. There you go. Sure. Exactly. And that resulted in me having the longest stretch of uninterrupted studio time in my whole life is right now, due to the fact that I'm getting a little bit of money every week and I can do that. And in a way, when you even say it out loud, you're like, oh my God, I'm so spoiled. But like, this is the thing that I've been working literally the past 20 years to sort of get at, for better or for worse. This is what I've thrown my lot in. So as a sculptor and as an artist, when I had this unemployment coming in, I was like, aesthetically, a little bit of money in the sculptures goes a long way. Like you don't want the whole thing upholstered in money. It looks good when there's just like a little bit of money, and it's the same thing in life. Like a little goes a long way. You just need that tiny little thing to keep you going. So I didn't come up with a solution to capitalism, as you may have predicted, but I feel like it stopped that kind of brain loop of like self-pity and but also trying to like recognize that all this is chosen, like that you've chosen this path, but then sometimes like you veer from self-pity into like, where's the nearest high horse? Like how can I jump onto it? It kind of like just broke that whole loop. And it stopped being about finding a solution and started being about just like, what is it? How is it actually functioning? As opposed to like, how does it function in sort of abstract ways for Europe? I knew him well. So yeah,
I think that covers sort of launches us into a lot of everything.
cool.
So then,
I forgot.
Oh, we got more.
One more thing today. I'm sorry.
no.
So the other thing that happened during COVID, which was so beautiful, is that I talked to my friend on the phone.
Oh, yes.
He lives in Los Angeles, and he might be a part of the Zoom call. So if you are, I love you, and I hope you don't mind. I won't mention you by name. But he is a very brilliant performance artist. So of course, he also is in dire financial straits at all times. And he says, Lee, I just joined my local chapter of Under Earners Anonymous. And I was like, wow, come on, like dish, tell me everything, you know? And he was like, yeah, here's what my sponsor said to me the other day. He said, we under earners, it's not that we have a money problem. That's debtors anonymous. That's something totally different. What we have is a time problem. And I was like, oh my God, like that's so accurate. Because whatever else, when you're sort of in that kind of pickle, I'm obviously, you know, not a miser with money, but I am such a miser with my time. Like I'm always like, well, is this worth it? Like, and you know, you're like, I'll just skip out on my family and skip out on, you know, being healthy and skip out on having a life and having friends because I gotta spend my time in the studio. And if I'm not doing that, like that's what I mean about being miserly about our time. And so that helped me kind of understand the whole mesh of it as well. I'm sorry, I just really wanted to get that in.
We had it in our notes as like, if we forget UA.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Exactly.
But also with time, there's this thing about making art where you're like, I spent so much time on it. It must have some vibration, which is
exactly.
It's actually not a simple equation.
Well,
often we feel that we've invested so much, so it must hold some value.
I think that is often the way that you do it. Oh, thank you. Oh, I holistic ID. This is like a behind the scenes zoom into the soup moment. Thank you. This is my COVID boo for anyone who doesn't know. Time and
investment.
That's how you often sort of apply value to something, especially kind of if you're not getting paid for it.
Right.
You know, you're like, well, it must be valuable because I spent a really long time making it, you know? And in a lot of cases that is true, like how you spend your time really does reflect what you care about and how you organize your energy. So all of that time, money, value thing, it's all in these sculptures. You know, you don't need to know all this back info, but that's sort of also the behind the scenes.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about, like, in all of these, there's this very delicate balance between the materials, and when you're making them, I see that sort of happening IRL. And of course, we're in this moment of great sort of free fall, uncertainty, precarity, which has always been there. And at first, when I was looking at them, the word precarity came to mind. And then I felt like it's actually more of a balancing act and more of that thing about like when you're on a tightrope, maybe you don't want to look down, otherwise you get disoriented. But so it has, I think I wanted to make that distinction between sort of that balancing act and parity.
Yeah.
You can riff on it.
Yes, I sure can. I think it was sort of like that thing where it's like, it's not that we have a money problem, it's that we have a time problem.
Right.
Like, I think I maybe was sort of thinking that it was about precarity, or it sort of illustrated precarity. And then what I realized was that, to me, what it really is about, whether you see it in the sculptures or not, is that it's not so much precarity, but it's about suspension.
Yeah.
And part of that is, to me, um, as somebody who's like 40 and is not gonna stop making art, like I've thrown in my lot, you often feel like you're Wile E. Coyote, like as long as you don't look down and realize that you're in thin air, you can kind of keep trucking along,
So it is almost like ties into faith.
It
Holding on
totally
to
ties
something.
into faith.
Yeah.
It totally ties into faith. And it totally, and when I started to think about it in terms of suspension,
Mhm.
I also started to think about it deeply about delusion. Like, for example, it's finally entered my cranium that, like, I may not be discovered as a child prodigy. It was hard.
The opera diva at 12.
But kind of as an artist, you are in order to sort of keep going, if you don't like have certain levels of support, you are kind of constantly sort of like telling yourself that, like, like sometimes the worse your trajectory gets, the more that sort of reinforces the underdog story. Where you're like, well, if there's nothing in my life at all, then like when my triumph comes, it'll be all the sweeter. And I was trying to think about delusion as like particularly a creative engine. And I was thinking about it in particular because I read an interview with the author Hilary Mantel, and she was saying, like, the way I started writing was that when I was a kid, I would walk to school, and as I was walking to school, I would think of like the perfect words to describe the weather in her head. Like, she wasn't writing it on paper, but she was writing in her head, and that's how her first writing happened. And I read that and I was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I was like, oh no, I'll never be a writer because I never did that. And I was like, I never write in my head. And then I was like, wait a minute, I do write in my head all the time. But the kind of writing that's happening in my head is like, I'm writing out like my Oscars acceptance speech. Or, like if I ever get interviewed in like one of those like really thick European magazines, like this is what I'm gonna say. Yeah. Or just like kind of when you get into that mind space where it's sort of fun for you to like, there's the ambassador and he's like having a conversation with like the reactionary. I mean, I did write a short story about this, where they're like monologuing with each other in their heads, in my head, and in their heads.
My head.
Exactly. and so I was just like, oh, that is kind of how I do write in my head. That is like sort of where it starts for me. And I think a lot of my art practice, it has delusion, which as a kind of creative force as well. Like that is a lot of the engine of it.
Well, there's sort of like yeah, anyways, but we're gonna keep moving.
Yeah. No. So I think delusion, suspension, Wile E. Coyote sort of treading air. They're all that. And then the other thing I was really thinking about suspension, because often people look at these works and they're like, oh, they're very airy. And I was thinking about, in quarantine, I read like all of Philip Roth's, and I love it. And I will happily talk with anybody about that later. But one of the things that he says is the reason that he loved reading books as a kid was because it was this suspended moment where he could have this other consciousness flowing over him, but you didn't need to talk back to the book. And so in that notion, like suspension sometimes feels like stasis, like you're not going anywhere, but then also suspension sometimes feels like it opens up this third space where you can think about things that you can't normally when you kind of need to react in real time. And so in that way, I I I was happy to think of that, like not only as a creative engine, but also as the thing that then happens when you look at art too.
Right.
That this moment
That opens up.
opens up. Yeah, exactly.
Which happens in art in different ways.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
And so then let's move into materiality.
Okay.
So Lee has 3/4 inch ply, sometimes 1/2 inch ply, and that's sort of your bread and butter material. And the last body of work was all that. And these new ones, and occasionally you do add in everyday objects, but these new ones have a very specific dictionary of objects that you're using alongside the plywood. So you have erasers, you have, well, you have the money, which you know, and rubber bands. Sometimes you burn things, you have matches in it. So it feels very specific the way you're, you know, the decisions you're making around adding in these other kinds of objects. And maybe
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so I wanted to put in real objects for a few different reasons. One of them being just, we've all had those moments where we are looking at, we look down and we see like a beautiful piece of confetti on the ground, and it's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
done.
Done. Yeah, exactly. You're like, I'm gonna steal that for my sculpture, and then also, of course, like, because we are sculptors, like there is an intimacy of objects that is so different, I think, from painting. I mean, you can have intimacy there too, but like a sculpture can be like the pillowcases on your bed, or the keys in your pocket, or the coins, or the erasers, or this or that. And I really wanted
Clothes on your body.
clothes on your
things
body, and I really wanted to sort of honor that. And I also love, to me, there's sort of like the wardrobe in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where when you put like a real thing in like a fake thing, it's like the theme to the fantasy world, and I love that
Yes.
aspect of it too. That it's sort of like the secret life of erasers. That's like
right.
what they do when we don't know what they're doing.
And suddenly you look at them and you think, I've never thought about them looking like little clips.
Right.
Until this moment.
Right.
Looking at,
Exactly. Yeah.
and it carries with you.
Exactly. And that's their secret life. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was that they all, as a sort of stationary, there it is, as a stationary object, when you have a sculpture that is a stationary object, to me, something like a matchstick automatically implies movement. Like it doesn't require a big leap of your brain to, your brain creates like a little GIF where it gets struck and it goes into flame. Or like when you see a rubber band in a sculpture, you don't need to actually see it move to know how rubber bands move, how they stretch. When you see an eraser, you know how, like, you can imagine moving around. And so I like being able to add this like sort of liveliness, these small amounts of movement in a stationary sculpture. For me, it kind of does all of those things.
Look at it. Amazing. So, and then let's just also talk about scale while we're on this sort of like material list. So, in the last ones you had it, they were very much like people size. And now they've gone into a new scale. They're sort of like these doll houses, some of them, and they have, it's like the POV is completely different. And you have this mix of objects that are life size, like the erasers and the rubber bands, but then there's a kind of quarter scale figures in a lot of them. And so to me, when I looked at them, I felt like there's something that is a distancing quality that has to do with all of these scale shifts mixed together. And also maybe when you see your work as well, but just to speak about like the POV scale.
Yeah, totally. I think it's sort of like, it's like almost like, I'd love to know sort of more what the scale shift does for you, because I think for
Like
me,
I can't tell if I'm far away or they're far away from me in my emotional landscape.
totally, totally. And I think the reason why I don't exactly know, what they do yet is because for me, again, kind of like using the dollar bills, the the decision to shift scale was mostly a logistical one. Partially was that when I started making these plywood sculptures, like 5 years ago or whatever, it was actually the first sculpture I had ever really made where I felt like they could stand on their own, that they didn't need like a performance to go with them or projections, or like they had, for whatever reason, I was like, all right, these will do.
Right.
But I never had that experience before. And that is part of the reason I made them life size, because not that it's like a total cheap trick, but I was like, well, when things are life size, they just automatically have this impact, that because they seem to share space with us. So I was like, I'm going to use that. I'm not confident, so I'm going to use that, But then the reason I started working smaller is because I had to pay for a storage space, and it makes me very angry. Like,
All sculptors can relate.
all sculptors can relate. Like, in sculpture, you just start running out of room, and it sucks. Like, it sucks. And I feel very much like a deadbeat dad about things that I made. Like, I'm like, isn't it enough to create it? Like, do I have to take care of it too? Like, I don't like having pieces that are old around, and then you fill up your studio and you have no room to make new stuff.
They fill your brain.
And they fill your brain, and it's just a bummer. And so for that reason, I keep kind of with two solutions, which was one, I'll start cannibalizing the old sculptures to make new sculptures, which I feel great about on every conceptual level and as an eco-dyke, you know. And then also I shifted scales because, kind of really in COVID, because I felt like, I think maybe we've all had these moments of, in the last 9 months or whatever, where, hello, camera, where we're like, are we gonna just have to fucking put on our backpacks and leave our homes? And I mean, that happens. Like, when you read history, you realize that there are moments that come where people have to put all their possessions on their backs, and which is not, I don't mean to say that, I don't mean to say that I'm in that spot or that we're in that spot or anything like that, but you kind of have that feeling to some degree. And also because we have been quarantined for so long, and you're like, if they really, domestic space, and maybe if they are smaller, it's nice to think about people living with them in this way.
Right.
So the shift got smaller because I thought they were a little bit easier to handle. I can't totally sling them on my back and, set off with my bindle stiff. But
it's an amazing image.
I know, exactly. But they, especially because there's been times in my life, speaking of living on $5,000 a year, where if you move to a new apartment or whatever, you move on your bicycle. You just do 15 trips forth and carry everything on your bicycle. But so the scale shift mostly happened for those logistical reasons. and so I don't like, but they have to be still kind of big because they're still drawings and you need a certain amount of negative space for them to, for me to think that they look good. So they can't get too small, but these are kind of as small as I think that they can get without getting all fucked up. So that's my answer about scale.
There you go.
And what about, you know, you've referenced language, you've referenced the verbs, you have a very deep relationship to language, and sometimes it seems like the language is built into these, and then, but in a way, maybe, you know, I wouldn't say that it's that simple. So, you know, and also these are live drawings, they're three-dimensional drawings. And just talk about like how writing and language intersect with the objects and or.
Absolutely. Before I do that, should we do a little time check? What time is it? Just so that I'm not like blah blahing. 6:40. Okay, I think
We're good.
we're getting close.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
on track.
Okay, cool. So, my relationship with, I guess, there's two things I guess that I would like to talk about. One is that 90% of my brain is built from the books that I've read, possibly even a larger percentage. Like when I sort of am getting inspired or I'm getting ideas or I'm in dialogue with something, it's almost always something that I've read. It's rarely like art that I've looked at, even though there's certain art that I love a lot. It's almost always like, I read Dickens and now I'm gonna work with money, you know? So there's that. And I think because I feel like I kind of taught myself how to be an artist. Like I've never taken a sculpture class, you know. I learned through this beautiful like DIY experience of living in Chicago. I feel like I taught myself how to be an artist. And then recently I was kind of thinking like, well, maybe I can teach myself to be a writer too, if I kind of take it as seriously. Like if I did what I did with art, which was just do it every single day for, you know, almost 20 years now. And now, I mean, it took me a long time to make anything. Really in the past 5 years, I've only ever made art that I actually think is okay, you know. And I'm like, well, I could become a writer if like, you know, if I write every day for the next 20 years, maybe I'll end up with a novel. And that I will be jazzed about, like that will be excellent. And I think I also sort of got super like vigilant or like, I don't know what the word is, defiant about my love for writing and novels, because when you start hanging out in the art world, you start overhearing all this weird shit. Like people are always saying things like the tyranny of language. And I'm like that doesn't make any sense to me at all. Like you can get a dictionary and there's literally millions of words in there. And if you can't find the word you need, you can make one up. Like it can be a sound. It's totally free. And then you, like, you know, I'm sure we've all had this experience where you read a press release for an art show and you're like, what does this mean? They are murdering language and this is not okay. So I think
a word salad.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I kind of got super kind of defiant or reactionary or contrarianism about that. But the other thing had to do with process, which is that like, you know, I've always done super labor intensive work, which means that like I can have one idea and it will take me literally a month, if not longer, to sort of execute that idea and still end up with something that's like shitty or like not what I meant or just like not quite right or whatever.
Gotta do it again.
Yeah. So like there's this lag between thinking and then like result thinking or something that I'm okay with, but I also am like, but writing is so different. Like writing, you have to think, literally, you will not put down another word unless you have a thought about what word you want. There are literally millions of thoughts whenever you try to write anything. And I thought, like, that's really cool, because if I am only a sculptor, I think, like, if I could just like have about, like 24 ideas for the rest of my life. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then I'll be like, Lee, you didn't like spend enough of your life thinking,
But you did spend a lot of your time reading books on tape as you make
Yeah.
sculpture.
Exactly. That's the real reason I make art, is because I love to listen to books.
So then I have a quickie, and it's a
Yeah.
biggie quickie.
Yes.
And when I look at these works, I always think about mandalas, or those sort of Christian paintings of the different tiers of power, and, like access, up and down, heaven and hell. It's the tiers of hell. But, and so I thought about that in these, and I know that you have been talking about finding God. And I just wanted to briefly touch on spirituality work, devotion.
Yeah.
It's an open field.
Yeah. Well, again, like, I guess I sort of started getting interested in God. It's like, well, first of all, I wasn't raised with any religion. And, like somebody asked what religion I was in the 4th grade. And I like went home and I asked my dad, and, oh, you're a secular humanist. I was like, boy, and I'm a
Good answer.
contrarian, so it's kind of like, well, whatever is like other people are like not thinking about, like, that's what I'm gonna think. I'm thinking about God, but like not in the fucked up way. Like, I'm gonna think about God in like a cool way.
And like go sing, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think, when I was still sort of thinking that I could solve capitalism, I was like, well, maybe God is a strong enough force to come, like, it's so strong, capitalism. The money thing is so strong, and it's so hard to not feel like you're in your grip. Like, maybe it is God that is the force that's strong enough, which isn't to say, I know the church and money have always been, religion and money have always been intertwined in different ways, but like maybe there's something in there. But ultimately, I have to say that, like, Savvy is the only person who would probably ask me that question, because like I could be like, yeah, I'm gonna go to church. I'm gonna go to gay church on Sunday,
And they're at the same time as Under Earners Anonymous.
So it's like hard decision, even though I didn't. So that was the thing. Like, I literally would forget every time. Like, I just would not remember. Like, not even like an hour later. Like, oh, I meant to go to church. Like days later, like I would just totally forget that was what I wanted to do. So it's like,
There is something also exciting about thinking about a sort of code that you don't have to invent yourself around ethics and morality, and like the dignity of strangers intersecting, and or like, and different animals.
Right.
Having a respect for life.
Right.
So it is an appealing, I see the appeal.
Absolutely.
Which so ultimately I feel like devotionally maybe it's towards art. I mean,
Definitely. I mean, I think we, and so many of you, is like, my God is art. Like,
God is art.
and I, or like, my God is thinking. Like, that's Philip Roth quote, is thinking is the most transgressive thing you can do. So I think that there can be this way where you're like, that is what you're devoted to. That you're like, I just really want to think.
Yeah.
I want to be honest about whatever it is, right? Including my delusions.
Space to be honest.
Yeah.
And then what about morality in art, and this sort of thing that I think a lot of us are always rolling around? Like, can we like art? Or
Can we like art? That's a great question.
Can we like art when we don't like the person? Is the art the product of goodwill and or good intentions, and like whatever, where do those things exist in your mind? And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, that was something that we definitely thought about today in particular, of course,
and with the week that
because of the week that we've had. You know, it's fucking nuts, right? This past week was fucking nuts. And and again, because a lot of us kind of go into art because we want to think about how to live in the world and how we want to live in the world and how to ethically live in the world. I think you can get into this place where you start to think it's like very, very direct. Like where like because we all really care about the world and how to live in it, the sort of rhetoric gets more and more sort of elevated, where it gets to this point where it's like, if we curate a perfect show, we're like creating legislation. And or like if we decide to like a movie or like an artist, that's like voting for that person. And it's an understandable impulse, but it's not how it works. I wish art did create legislation. Like I wish that if you could write the perfect book, you would solve capitalism or whatever it is. You know what I mean? But I do feel like that there's some sort of discourse drift that happens that kind of conflates the two, and it starts being negotiated on these terms where you really believe that when you're curating a show, you're making legislation, and that sucks. It's too bad because
well, art can do so much.
Art
But
can
it can't do
so
that,
much, but it
maybe.
can't do that. And also then it's like, well, actually there are real things, activist things that you can do,
Right.
that like getting somebody a little bit of financial support through unemployment or whatever. There are things that you can do to make thinking actually more possible. But art is not that. Art is something else. Art
Legislation is about sort of distilling what a situation needs. It's like that's not the process of making art. Art is
Right.
about asking questions and not answering them, or leaving
Right.
things open to
right.
interpretation.
Like political efficacy, you often really have to simplify things to enact them in the world, and that's great. But when you simplify things in art, you just end up not telling the truth. And then I feel bummed about that. You know? So I think for me it's been like so, and it's so interesting because like when COVID happened, the only thing that was like in the first 2 months where it was like so confusing and we were like, is this the new Black Death when literally a third of the world's population died? Like, are we all gonna die? The one thing that would get me out of that brain loop was looking at this Van Gogh painting. I'd never even really had a particular feeling about Van Gogh, but this painting made me so happy. So it's like, yes, this is what art can do. It opens up this third space, this space of suspension where you can think about all kinds of super complicated shit. But it can't ever replace actual legislation, laws, voting, etc. And I don't think we should talk about it as though it can, no matter how well intentioned that is. Because to me that just goes against what we actually know from real life experience, you know? So,
And it doesn't ask art to do what it can do.
right. Martha Graham said it right. She said, art doesn't create change, it registers change. So, like, yes, Dickens totally influenced me, and all the other things I've read have influenced me.
And culture in general.
And culture in general, there's no
Influences us.
question in all sorts of
And
ways.
it's plastic as well.
But the things that really change a person's life and their ability to think is, you know, economics, etc. So for me, it's actually in times like this, in weeks like this, it's actually really important to separate the two and to really be honest about what each thing does.
That's where we stop
That's
the
where we end.
convo. Yeah. And we open it up to questions and more dialogue.
If anybody has any questions or if
Mhm.
anybody like wants, I'm not sure how the tech is working, but like if anybody wants to see anything
Yeah, we can
close up, we
do-
can move. Or, and y'all can ask the questions via chat, or you could.
Okay, so it's pop your question in your chat. In
If
the
anyone
chat.
has any questions.
Oh, these are nice chats.
Wow, so true.
It's your money.
Yeah, it's everyone's money now.
The white outside, red inside sculpture. Great.
Professor
Prof.
Rooney.
Hey,
Thank you,
Prof.
Professor Rooney. Oh my
Of
God,
course.
that is also a great question. Hannah Barrett, my
That's a
friend
great
in
question.
literature. Um, I didn't even think of Bleak House, to be totally honest. I actually did finally read Bleak House, and I do love it.
The reason is we hasn't read it yet, or no, you just said you did.
No, I actually have. It was like the one that I wanted to read for a long time, but I hadn't. Now I have read it. To be honest, the real choice was. That's not funny. Bleak House is. I think it's. I think I'm not sure if I totally disagree. I mean, it's funny that you just said that over chat. I like that aspect of it. Actually, I think for me, House of Mirth was a little bit more open-ended. It's actually very hard for me to think of titles, especially for only 3 works, like because I kind of work in series. So for me, House of Mirth was a little bit more open-ended. It comes from a quote from the Bible, which is basically like, you don't learn anything from the House of Mirth, but you learn from the House of Mourning, which I don't actually agree with at all. My favorite artist of all time is the comedian Maria Bamford. Like, I really believe in the learning of comedy. And for me, it sort of had that kind of light touch where it has laughter in it, and it's like joy inside my tears for me. Whereas Bleak House would be a little bit too like bleak.
So we have, how has your experience of having not taken any sculpture classes informed your work and also your existence as an artist in your community?
It gave me a gigantic chip on my shoulder. Well, no, the chip came later. I really I think it made me feel really free, like being in the DIY scene and community in Chicago, where everybody was just making things. Like you would just run into somebody on the train or on their bikes, and they'd be like, "I'm making this comic," and you just wanted to make something to like give them in exchange. And I think I I think I think also if you don't like know how to do something, then you often come up with a solution that's sort of more interesting. Like a lot of woodworkers look at this work and they're like, "Why are you doing that? Like that doesn't make any sense." And I'm like, "Yeah, you know." So I think it made me feel free. I felt like for the first time that I could participate in this way that I always wanted to. And I'm really glad that I didn't try to be an artist in my 20s in New York, because that would have like been, I can't imagine how you would experiment like that when you needed to make so much money and things are so professionalized here. The thing that I got the chip on my shoulder later was trying to go to an MFA. And that sort of just exploded in all kinds of ways. And I am, regardless of like what you can or can't learn, or like what you can or can't learn from teaching or being in a class, like I think that's like a really interesting question. And I have no idea what the answer is. Like, can you teach art or not? I have no idea. But
There's some good teachers.
there's some great teachers,
the
and when
call.
you are teaching too, you're like, love this exchange.
Yeah.
But I think I just feel like it was one of those things where I thought maybe school would be the solution, and it turned out not to be. Not even because of the content of the classes, but because of the finances. It feels very much like higher education these days is a pyramid scheme. You get into a shit ton of debt to get your MFA or whatever, and then you get paid $2,000 a semester to teach, and
then you drop out.
you drop out. And so I don't, I hope that answers it. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Is there-
Close-ups of some of the other two sculptures behind us. Yes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Oh, there she is.
Boom. Notice there's no corners.
Yeah, there's no corners in this infinity room.
Nor on the sculptures.
Yeah, so there's
Money.
those are the little things growing out of the bottom. That's made out of dollar bills. And everything else, so it's like the erasers and the rubber bands are the sort of hands.
Yeah.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Great to see you, Eleanor. Such a sweet crew.
Really nice. Really, really nice. So nice. Oh, hello.
Oh, I had one question. You always put figures in it.
Oh, yeah.
It's never just completely abstract.
I think that's because I'm a novel reader. I can't imagine. I think for me, I would always have a figure in a landscape. Or like
Yes.
figure. I don't think I would ever have just a landscape without a figure, just because for me, that's where it all happens.
The lighting is, we're going to talk to you
Lighting's
later
great.
about it, Shaw.
Great.
There's some serious LED action, totally
Yes,
even.
exactly. Seriously, yeah, this is such a beautiful space.
Yeah.
And also, if people are in New York, you can totally make appointments and put on your sexy mask
Yeah, or two.
or two masks.
That works.
And just make an appointment. If you want like me or us to come and be here, and
We'll wear
while
our
you come,
sexy
just let
masks
us
too.
know. Yeah, absolutely. Or you can come on your own.
Whatever. What visual artists have you been looking at, inspired by lately? What a fun question.
Like, you mean besides Van Gogh? I don't know. But this is like a visual artist.
So Gustin.
Oh,
Philip
yes,
and Philip.
Philip Gustin. Well, because of my Philip Roth mania, I did realize that Philip Gustin and Philip Roth were very good friends. They lived very close to each other. And actually, I have loved Philip Gustin for a long time. But once I saw, I really wanted to post it on Instagram actually, and then I was like, that's confusing. But there's like I urge you all to Google this immediately. It's the cutest picture of Philip Gustin and Philip Roth like hanging out together outside, like on a rock. And so yeah, I love Philip Gustin, and I'm so fucking bummed that they made that decision to cancel his show. It's like,
Wish we could all
what's
talk about it
what's
right
the
now.
point? Yeah, exactly. But that's like a whole other 2-hour-long conversation. But Van Gogh and Philip Gustin for me, again, like I mostly read books, so I don't actually look at that much art. The
What
art that
about
I love, I'm devoted to. Your art, Silky? I mean, I love your paintings. Can we just like talk about that? I do love your paintings. It's hurrah! It actually is really nice to have. Oh, don't You're not kidding. It's real. I know it. Let's just be open about how gigantic our egos are. You know?
It's what keeps the engine running.
Exactly. But also, so like pretty much everyone in this Zoom is an artist who I really respect and love. And that is actually part of the thing about and being raised or having your formative experiences in the DIY art world, because you're just like, I'm learning from my peers. I'm riffing off what they're doing. I'm thinking so much more about what they're making than like what's going on at Ace Gallery or whatever it is. You know what I mean? So it's that too.
Are you going to keep working with paper money? Will you stick with these materials, or are they just for this project? Great question.
Well,
I just want to say,
yeah.
when Lee first started,
Yeah.
there was this deflated beach ball head made out of money, and it was
Thank
an
you,
early
my
one.
darling. Thank you. That was like another failed experiment. Well, I spent $200 on my dollar bills and I can't spend any more. So if I continue to cannibalize the older works, like possibly, I'm not sure. But the red piece, the red glow one, is the newest piece, and I think so. That one has toll and just a teeny tiny bit of money in it, and rubber bands and erasers. And I have a feeling whatever I make next will be sort of most related to that. Yeah, that one. So there's
A money
there's
flower.
the
God.
that it says God on our currency. I mean, which is really wild. I just thought like I'd put it in there to just be like, this is fucking weird that we have God on our money.
Oh, Lydia put in the pic of the Phillips.
Oh, I can't. Oh, great. I can't see it, but hopefully y'all can see it. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I've been having a really, I'm having a really hard time in the studio. I don't like want this conversation to go about like me complaining about that. But yeah, I mean, these three pieces represent like about a year and a half of work. So it's like kind of no joke about how slow I work.
And it's
so-
interesting. Well, I just feel like it's about getting the materials to work in the way that you want.
Exactly.
It is about hyper control. So, but I mean, Lee's been working with the money now, I think, for 2 years. And you mentioned that you probably wouldn't have started working with money right out during COVID,
No.
just to be clear.
Definitely, I would not have. I mean, it just would have happened so differently. So the answer is I'm not sure, but I'll let you know in like 3 or 4 months when I finish another sculpture.
Here's 2 questions coming in the transom. I love those money buds and eraser buds. So much of the sense of a living biology. Are you thinking of a science ecology when making these? Thinking of science or ecology, Lee?
In a way, yes. Actually, we got to spend some time in nature this summer, which I had never done. I had gone camping for like 2 days, and that like I've always lived in a city. I've never been a pastoral person. And of course, when you're like out in the super rural countryside, you're like, oh, nature is so beautiful. And I know that it's like literally the most obvious thing you can say, but then to us, not to us. And also like, then you're like, and that's its whole, well, no, but like, that's what art is too. It's just like beauty. Like, what's wrong with beauty? Like, nature is beautiful and some art is really beautiful, and that's great.
And that's fine.
I mean, also, this is why I have to like really think out what I'm going to say beforehand, because just stop me if I start being too stupid. No. I mean, I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way. I just mean like I'm slow in my thought process. So
I have one more question.
Well, but I feel
yeah.
like, so I guess Molly, I guess no, not really, except for that when you draw a lot, like the natural forms are just so delightful. You know, you're like, I'm just gonna draw with a ruler. And so immediately you kind of are like going into organic forms and that. But I have to say, like, I can't like fake that I have like a deep conceptual drift about ecology and this and that. Maybe that'll come.
What will the
Uh,
conversation be
uh,
between these works and the installation at your upcoming installation at Callicoon?
That's a great idea. Thank you. Thank you so much for asking, Khalil. My sibling, who is also at Callicoon, my sculpture sibling as well. Probably a lot of them will be the same because I do work so slowly. Um, but other than that, I'm not totally sure. Um, we'll see. I have like maybe 4 or 5 months. So like during that time, like will I be able to make maybe 2 more sculptures, maybe 3 more sculptures? We'll see. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the relationship will be, except for that I'm sure there will be some overlap, so that it's not like a show with like one sculpture.
Well,
in it.
it's a body of work that's been developing and
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Are you writing anything for a new publication? Thank you for asking. I just finished a new short story about a month ago about a teenage thespian, which I am really jazzed about. And it's all about self-delusion, which also really made me think about it. And I've submitted it to a few places, and so we'll see. I'm gonna try to get it published. But if anybody is like knows some really high-flying literary editors, you know, let me know. That's my answer.
Great.
Great.
Great. So should we leave some time or? It's been a nice.
It's been so.
We don't want you guys to feel antsy because after an hour
Yeah.
and 10 minutes, you're like, go eat some food and go to bed.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all
guys.
for coming.
Thank you so much for coming and being here with
Yeah.
us. It's like so thrilling. It's such a COVID silver lining, actually, to be able to
Yeah.
connect with people in different places like this in different time zones.
Yay. And let us know if you want to come and do a studio visit. We'll all mask up.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Yay.
Hooray! We don't know how
So
to
nice
leave
to
the
see
Zoom, so we'll
everything.
just like smile until everyone leaves. Stopped it.